Hi, welcome to In One Day with Lisa and Eric.
Yes, well, it's great to be back. Thank you for joining us yet again. And today we have an interesting topic. Today we're talking about relationships and communication.
Yes, and I love talking about relationships because it's he said, she said. You get the male perspective, divine masculine is what I like to say,
Sure.
and the divine feminine. And it's really good to get both perspectives for
Absolutely.
sure.
Yeah, and I always say I think that every story really has three sides, right? You
Yeah.
have my side, my partner's side or my spouse's side, and then the truth is always somewhere in the middle because I think that ultimately we kind of add our emotion into that side of things, and it kind of warps a little bit what's going on. But
Yes.
yeah, I mean, communication is obviously the most important, but it's also the most difficult.
No, for sure. And we're going to definitely get really to the heart of the matter here.
We hope
So,
so.
yeah. So Eric has a beautiful wife, and I have
Thank you, thank you.
a divine spiritual husband who's beautiful too.
Hmm.
And we were talking about it because I have a tattoo with an infinity symbol, and about our love is this lifetime, many past lifetimes, and many future lifetimes
Absolutely
together.
right.
And then we were talking about your beautiful bracelet.
Right.
That's super
So
cool.
we have the red thread. Both of us have it tattooed. My wife has a similar one as well. And the significance behind that thread is that it can bend, it can break. Or I'm sorry, it can bend, it can mold, it can fray, and it can stretch, but it'll never break. So the
Yeah.
idea is that no matter what, the universe has brought these two people together, and you'll always be together and connected in that way.
Yes, and I believe so much in the universe bringing people together.
Hmm.
So I myself have never in my life done any online dating.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying there's something wrong with it. I think it's great for a lot of people, but I just feel like I always wanted to meet someone organically,
Sure.
naturally from the universe.
Hmm.
So how did you guys meet? You met organically or
We
not
met.
online?
No, we met organically. So we actually met in person.
Oh.
But in given in today's climate, right? I think that
Mm.
the internet in some ways brought a lot of opportunities for people to meet, right? Because
Yes, for
you may be
sure.
from a small town or maybe your circle is not as big, but the internet gives you that ability to meet so many other people. Because
Mm.
in reality, there is someone for everyone out there. You just got
Yes.
to find that person. So I think that there's pros and cons. I mean, we've all heard of the catfishing and stuff that's happened, even to the
Right.
point that celebrities have fallen for this.
Yes.
But they're people too, right? We're all people, and unfortunately, there are cons to this as well.
Yeah, well, and I take that back. I met him on LinkedIn. So I did
That's,
meet
that's
him
kind
online,
of,
but it
yeah,
wasn't online dating. But it was cool because
sure.
during COVID, I was posting all these fitness videos to motivate and inspire people.
Hmm.
And I inspired him, and he was living in Oregon,
Oh
and
wow,
I'm in Florida. I mean, two of the furthest points of the
absolutely,
map.
yeah. You're corner to corner of the country,
Yeah, so if it
exactly.
wasn't for social media, we would have never met.
Right, right.
So
Well,
that's pretty cool, right?
yeah. So I mean, so it does have its benefits, right? So,
Yes,
but yeah, now getting into the relationship side of things. I mean,
yes,
obviously, something you just mentioned, someone from Oregon, and you here from Florida. Now, were you born and raised Florida?
yes, born and raised.
And he was born and raised in Oregon.
Yeah, so a country boy and a city girl. And
Yeah.
we did the long distance relationship
Hmm.
for 1 year. And it was great because every time we would see each other, we'd have such a beautiful weekend.
Absolutely. Right.
It was like a fairy tale.
Right.
Then we moved in together. That's when the problem started. Because I have two teenagers. He has
Right.
a 7-year-old.
Hmm.
Blending a family, oh God, that was not easy at
Right.
all.
Yeah. And first of all, blending two personalities, right? Because we all have our own individualism and our own thoughts, obviously, but we have our own habits and
Mm,
things that we like to do, things we don't like to do. And when you're at that distance, that puppy phase, let's call it, right, the puppy love phase,
right.
you have that separation. So
Mm,
you get to miss each other, you get to see each other again. But yeah, right when you move in together, everything changes because now you're
everything.
seeing those things day in and day out. So something that might have been cute or tolerable all of a sudden can become, you know, nagging and annoying. So
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
it's a huge difference once you move in.
And I had only lived with my husband that I was married to and had two kids.
Hmm.
My entire life, he was the second man I moved in with.
Hmm.
And I was set in my ways because the kids and I had been alone for almost 9 years
Wow.
since
Okay.
I got divorced. So at our age and you know, after like 35, 40, I'm now 51. Oh, I just turned 52 and I'm proud
Yes,
to be
absolutely.
my
Happy birthday
age.
again.
Thank you.
Christmas
Thank
Eve.
you.
That's right.
No, and at this age, you're set in your ways. It's
Right.
very hard to change. And then the kids and I were alone, and now here comes a man with his child.
Hmm.
So it does change the whole dynamic. So let's talk about the key components that are so important when you do live together, like communication.
Sure.
Let's talk about that.
I mean, communication is, let's call it the paramount thing, right? I
For
mean, you could say
sure.
there's so many different things that you should focus on in a relationship, but communication above all is the most important because regardless of, whether you're setting date nights or whatever the case may be, because there's so many little things that we can touch on. I
Mm.
mean, communication number one is the most important piece of the puzzle.
Yes, and we women communicate, most of us, very well.
Mhm.
And I'm sorry to like label men,
Sure.
but why is it that it's harder for men to communicate?
It's an interesting question because I think we're all different in some ways. I can speak a little bit towards myself, but for me, I'm a fixer, and I think a lot of men are fixers. So when
Mm.
a situation occurs or something happens, our first natural reaction is, okay, well, how do we fix this? How do we get it done, and how do we get it over with?
Right.
And maybe the conversation needs a little bit more time than that. So we're just trying to get to the end of the situation without going through all the other steps. So,
Mm.
so I think it does become a little difficult for men to communicate because we're just trying to get to, hey, look, I get it, you're upset, or hey, this didn't work out, but why are we going to waste all our time on this when we can just, okay, I got it, let's
Right.
just go ahead and call it
And women
quits.
are total opposite.
Right. Well,
We have to keep talking about it, expressing our
mhm.
feelings, verbalize. So yeah, how do we make it work?
If we can figure that out, we won't even be on the show anymore.
So true. You're right. You're right.
But it takes work. I mean, in the end, it just takes work. And, you know, um, we go into relationships kind of expecting the fairy tale to be forever. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the biggest mistakes we make, right? Because
Yes.
the minute the ship starts shifting, that's where we start getting upset. We get angry. Things used to be this way, things used to be that way. We used to do these things. But the reality is, we're still growing.
Mm.
We feel we're adults, but we're still aging, we're still growing. Our likes or dislikes change and all that. So if you don't communicate that together, you start growing apart. And that's where
Yes.
the issues begin.
Right, for sure. And with Brian and I, it was hard because when I have an issue and I want to talk about it, and I have a degree in psychology, so you
Sure.
can
Yeah.
imagine. He's always like, don't psychoanalyze me. I don't need that. But I'm
Right.
really not.
Hmm.
It's just I like to get to the root of the problem or whatever it is we're discussing. But he likes to just shut down,
Hmm.
walk away, and take a couple hours to himself.
Sure.
And so at the beginning, I did not like that.
Hmm.
And I would like keep on and on, like, no, we got to talk now. Let's not wait. But then I matured a little bit
Hmm.
in this relationship and I realized, you know what? Let me give him his space. Let me give him his time. He always comes back and then he can talk better,
Hmm.
more calmly, and not like kind of get fired up or agitated about
Right.
whatever it is.
Hmm.
So I guess it's like you need to learn, you need to grow, you need to see that two people are different. You're not both
Um,
always the
that's
same.
right. That's right. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, you're not the same and you're constantly aging, you're growing. And maybe the way you felt about yourself when you were younger and, you worked out harder and maybe you don't
Mm,
have that physique anymore. And that's something that bothers you, but your spouse doesn't mind,
right.
but that may be like a little trigger for you internally that you may have an outburst later about something else, right? Because
Yes.
sometimes the outburst really isn't what is occurring in that moment. The outburst is really a culmination of things, and finally something just triggered you to let it all out. And the other big mistake we make, and this goes back to communication, is typically we react to the people we love,
Mm,
right? So when you're going to
mm.
let out the aggression, you're speaking to the person you love, and you're letting all that aggression out. It's not really about them; it's really about how you're feeling.
It's so true. And I love that you just pointed that out. So let me give an example. So when I was young, I got bullied terribly
Hmm.
in high school. And in my book, Metamorphosize, which I always forget to bring
Yes.
you, I talk about it, how bad it was. It was horrible for
Sure.
like 5, 6 years. And I have worked through those scars and the damage and the
Hmm.
baggage. And I really have done a lot of self work. on myself. But I noticed that some things with Brian would trigger my insecurities,
Sure.
and then I would lash out at him, but it really was about something I was
Something
feeling.
inside, absolutely.
So that's so true.
Yeah, and I mean that happens with Anna and I as well, and you know, and I'm kind of going through this process as well, and I've been doing a lot of reading and educating myself to understand, you know, things about myself that were in the past that maybe affect my decision making now,
Mm,
or maybe something that she says that can trigger me,
mm.
which, you know, she has nothing to do with, but that trigger just kind of gets that ball rolling. So definitely, you know, it's there's a lot of self reflection, a lot of self work that needs to be done constantly.
Yes.
You know, but beyond the communication side, then you get the fun stuff, right?
Right,
So,
of
you
course.
know, so date nights obviously a very
And
important
that
thing.
is so important. And let me tell you, I used to get so mad at Brian
Mhm.
because he wouldn't plan the date nights. He wanted them. But then I realized without him telling me that he's from Oregon, now he's in Florida. He's like, I don't know what to do, where to go.
Sure.
Like, Lisa, can you help me out? Plan them
Mhm.
and I'll take over and be there with you. But and then I was like getting mad because I'm thinking, why isn't he being the man, stepping up and planning these
Sure.
things? And when he finally communicated, back to communication,
Right.
that with me, then we do the date nights like once a week. Those are
Sure.
so important.
Well, you know, I came across something the other day, and I actually told my wife, I was like, we should really institute this, and we do go out, you know, often,
Uh,
but I was like, you know, there's one thing going out to eat, and there's another thing going out on a date.
yeah.
And you know, sometimes we confuse those. We're like, oh, well, we went out to dinner a couple of nights ago. Well, that's not
Uh,
really a date. We were just eating because we had to eat.
right.
You know, to me, a date night has to be a little bit more involved, a little bit more emotional. Like, you
Mm.
know, you go out and paint together, or sit on the beach
Right.
together, open a bottle of wine. It's
Yeah.
really about the experience.
Mm.
But going back, I'm sorry, I lost my track there. But so I saw this post on Instagram, and it was talking about the 222 rule, and I was
Mm.
like, oh, well, this is interesting. So what it states is every 2 weeks you should go out on a date night,
Mm.
and then it's every month you should go out for 2 nights,
Mm.
and then once a year you should go out for multiple nights. So and
Wow.
I'm sure I got that wrong because I know there was a third too, but the whole reality or the whole thing behind it was that, you know, it kind of puts you in this mechanism where you're like, hey, every 2 weeks we're doing this,
Mm.
every month we're doing this, and then every year we're going away for 2 weeks. That's what
Two
it
weeks.
was.
I was
There you go.
gonna
I
say
was
that.
saying
Yeah,
it had to be
yeah,
something
yeah.
like that.
I was gonna say that
Right.
they should go. We
Yeah.
should go away. But then, do you take the kids, or you leave the kids home?
Well, you should do that with just your partner,
Oh,
you
okay.
know, that way, because really what you're doing is connecting. And, you know, children add a whole other factor. And
Yes.
you know it, I know it.
Mm.
And Anna and I actually don't have children together at this point, but I do have my children from my previous marriage. So, you know, blending a family is another dynamic that, you know, just adds so much more to this whole communication necessity.
Mm. And talking about the date nights and the kids, without kids, let me tell you what Brian and I really have come to understand about each other over
Hmm.
the now 2 years we've been living together here in Florida, almost 2 years,
Hmm.
that we were putting our kids above our relationship.
Hmm.
And as a single parent, and I know you can relate to this, when you're divorced and you're taking on the role of a mom and a dad, because in our situation, I had full custody of my
Sure.
kids. Their dad was involved, but it was mainly me. In his situation, he had full custody of
Hmm.
his son. So now you have two single parents, their kids are their whole life, mine for 15, 16 years, his for like 7.
Sure.
And now how do you fall in love? How do you not make the kids your top priority? And we almost broke up over it
Yeah.
because all 3 kids love us and they want us happy, but they wanted us to themselves.
Right.
So
And
they did everything they could pretty much to break us up.
sure.
And it almost happened because we weren't putting ourselves above taking care of our kids.
Right.
And
Yeah.
now we changed it.
And it is difficult to kind of find that balance because you really need to find that equilibrium, and I struggle with that still, you
Mm,
know, because in the end they're your kids, and
mm,
you always want the best for your children, but at the same time you have to want the best for yourself, you know. So
yes.
if your relationship is important, you have to give that vested interest to your relationship, because in the
Mm,
end if you're not happy there, how are you going to be happy for your children?
Mm.
You know, and then ultimately, how are you going to be happy internally? And but it's such a difficult balance, and we went through ups and downs as well after we got married. You know, my children 17 and 14 today, so a little bit older. But you know, there was some rough years there where I had to find that balance and really just, you know, how much time am I dedicating there, and then how much time am I really giving to my wife?
Yes. And then another good subject, let's talk about jealousy,
Yes.
trust. I think jealousy and trust goes kind of hand in hand.
Yeah, I would say they're synonymous. Yeah.
For
Hmm.
sure. So in our situation, Brian was much more jealous than me, but then it kind of creeped in and I turned into the green-eyed monster
Sure.
a couple times. I think
Yeah, it's natural. It
we
happens,
all
right?
have jealousy,
Yeah.
but Brian had been hurt very bad in his
Hmm.
past relationship. So his trust was broken completely
Sure.
from the relationship. So with me, I had to realize that even though I'm totally different than his ex-wife,
Hmm.
that I had to be very aware of how I was acting and what I was doing because
Hmm.
you know me. I'm like a social butterfly and we grew up, well, I grew up here in South
Sure.
Florida. Did you grow
Yeah,
up?
primarily, right? I
Okay.
started in Miami and then worked my way
Okay, so
north.
you
So
know
yeah,
it's like Latinos and everyone's
absolutely.
hugging and kissing and very
Right,
affectionate.
right.
And Brian's like, "Why are you hugging all these guys?" And like, "What's the deal here?"
Hmm.
And then I was like, "How I'm not going to change my way of being."
Right.
But then I realized he's not used to that.
Hmm.
So you kind of do have to change, but in a healthy way.
Sure. Yeah,
Yes.
and it's a change, and it's also, you know, gaining that understanding, right? Because I mean, there is a huge polar opposite between South Florida, because
Yeah.
it's a big melting pot down here in South Florida, and you have a lot of influence from South Central America, and then you have the
Mm,
islands, and so down here the cultural mixing pot is just a lot fuller. Oregon, I actually lived in Washington State for a number of years, so just complete polar opposite in terms of, you know, how people conduct themselves there and here, and then you
mm.
have that cultural difference. Like, you know, I am Hispanic. I'm from Central America, so we're used to that. You know, even when you meet
Right.
someone for the first time, you know, you do the cheek to cheek kiss and things like
Yeah.
that. To us, it's very innocent, but I could see how someone else could look at it and say, "Hey, well, why would you do that?" Right? If they're
Right.
not used to that.
Right,
Hmm.
exactly. No, it's true. So let's talk about trust. Okay, so in our relationship, we I maybe because we're a little older and settled, we don't like going out partying. I mean, we do together. We go out to dinners
Hmm.
and clubs and drinks and dancing. But like I don't have girls' night out to a nightclub. He
Sure.
doesn't go
Right. Right.
out. Now I'll have girls' day at the beach or a girls' dinner,
Hmm.
but like there are a lot of couples that are okay with the guys go out to clubs till 3 o'clock in the morning. The
Hmm.
girls go to Vegas for the weekend. We're totally not into that because of past issues, I
Sure.
think.
Sure.
And you?
Well,
What
I
do you
mean,
think?
I think we're kind of along the lines as you, right? I mean,
Mm,
we do go clubbing together. Like we'll go out
mm,
to a dance club and listen to music or dance for a bit and things like that. But when it
mm.
comes to individually, you know, you'll have the nights to go out to dinner, you know, just the guys, or maybe she'll go out with family or the girls to go out as well. But you know, in the end, it just comes down to that communication, right? I mean, I think
Exactly.
everything we talk about wraps back to communication. So as long
Mm,
as there's a mutual understanding, but a true understanding, not this is what I'm going to do. I've told you deal with it, but
right.
rather, hey, I understand your side, you understand mine, and you come to an agreement. Then I think those things can work because every couple is different. You know, they all have
Yes, of
their manner of
course.
being together and finding happiness together.
Right. And like for me, for sure, we believe in monogamy. We're faithful to each other.
Hmm.
We don't have an open relationship, marriage, whatever. But I just know that in all honesty, we're always attracted to the opposite sex. I mean,
Hmm.
we
Of
all
course,
are.
absolutely.
But if we were to go out a lot, we're opening the door for things to happen. Even if, like, I'm madly in love with Brian
Hmm.
and I'm madly attracted to Brian too. So, like, I have all the components physical, mental, spiritual, emotional. But if one night we get in a fight and I'm out and I meet a hot guy and you know, like, it's just not that I would ever cheat on
Sure.
him, but
Hmm.
why open the door to problems and
Hmm.
allow them in? I just think it's better. And when you're happy with someone, you kind of want to be with them more often
Yeah,
than
more
you
often,
don't.
right? And so once again, we go back to balance, right? Because at the same time, in a relationship. And I think that, like I said, I've been married and divorced, and I had relationships before, but one of the things that I learned that's very important is not to lose yourself in your relationship. So
Hmm.
sometimes that's another factor where you invest yourself so heavily into your partner that you start losing yourself as an individual.
Yes.
And that's another thing that can really affect your relationship as you go along, because you wake up one day and you're like, well, who am I? Like, who is
Right.
this person? But
Mm.
you're right. I mean, again, as long as the communication's there, jealousy is natural. But sometimes I think when you feel it, you kind of have to reflect and say, well, what am I really jealous about? Is it their actions or is it my insecurity?
That's
And
so true.
that's a difficult thing to face.
Yes.
Looking at yourself and really reflecting inward and saying, look, am I projecting myself or is it really them doing what I think they're doing? So
Yeah.
something I work on all the time as well.
Yes.
So
But it's so true. And I'm going to be honest. Like I said, I just turned 52. I'm fit. I feel I'm an attractive woman. I feel beautiful
mhm.
inside and out. But knowing that I've gotten older, when there's a hot 25-year-old walking by in her little, short shorts, and I see him look, which is totally natural, sometimes I let the insecurities get the best of me. Not that I never tell him don't look. But if he
Sure.
looks a little too much, I'm like, hey, what are you doing?
Exactly.
But then I realize that it's
Right.
so true that it comes from insecurities. And when I work on myself, I don't feel that same kind of jealous. So it
That's
is a
true.
work in progress constantly on yourself.
Absolutely. And, again, there is a difference too, right? I mean, because I think we all naturally look.
Right.
There's one thing to look, there's another thing to gaze. And,
Yes.
and I think, if you're in that situation and your partner's just staring
Right.
or just outright, making moves to catch the attention of that other person, changes the dynamic significantly. At that point,
Yeah.
I'd say it's justified. But, beyond that, I think that it's always just inner reflection. So, I mean, inner reflection is a big thing, the communication, number two, and then again, just really dedicate time to each other. I mean, just really be there for each other, listen to each other, and take time with each other.
Yes, for sure. And you know what we do, which I love? We journal together. Like
Mm,
once a day, whether it's for 5 minutes or an hour, we sit down and we're like, okay, what are our goals? What can we make better in our family, with our children, with
right.
ourselves? And really, and it, again, communication, but also sharing your passions, your goals, your desires.
Hmm.
Talk about the hard things that people don't want to talk about. Let's talk about sex. Like,
Hmm.
what do you like? What don't you like? Don't just not share those kind of
Right.
things.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's important to discuss all those things. And, maybe what we'll do is on the website, on one of our blogs, we'll put some of those tips on there that you can take a look at if you're interested to see about, some of those things you can communicate, because the hard questions are really the ones you want to have and you want to discuss with your spouse. Because if you can tackle those together, then all the other stuff is easy.
Right.
So, I mean, those topics just specifically, I mean, sex, finances, job, how you feel about yourself, all those things are very important and should be discussed.
Hmm. And one thing that you brought up, I love that there's a way that a man and a woman could look at the opposite sex,
Mhm.
because there's a quote, and I can't remember the quote, but it's about when a man walks in the room with his woman, every woman in the room gets jealous because they see how the man treats her and looks at her and makes her feel like the queen of the
Mhm.
room. And it's so true, because I'm always telling Brian, no matter how beautiful I feel,
Mhm.
and no matter how much work I do on myself, when he tells me I'm beautiful and he looks at me and he touches me and
Mhm.
kisses me, and he does that wherever we go, and it just makes me feel like I'm on top of the world.
Right.
And it's amazing what you can do to make your spouse, to uplift your spouse
Absolutely.
or make them feel better, because it's just like, if you love someone, you want to do that for
Mhm.
your spouse.
Exactly. I mean, and there's so many things. I love you only goes so far. I
Right.
mean, when you express like I appreciate you,
Mm.
and in terms of endearment that are beyond the typical norms of love, just the typical I love you. I mean, it just really resonates a lot deeper, and I think it kind of hits a little bit harder where someone says, "Wow, like you're really paying attention to me, and
Mm.
that just really makes all the difference.
Yes, and we're very lucky and fortunate after failed marriages and relationships to have found our divine loves. But for those of you out there, before we say goodbye, if you're not in a relationship and you want one, like most people do, continue to do what Erick was saying. Work on yourself, love yourself, grow as an individual, and don't think that wherever I live, I'm not going to meet the person. Oh, Florida doesn't have the people, or
Mhm.
Oregon. And don't think that it's never going to happen. Believe that it will happen and
Absolutely.
know that it will happen, and you will manifest the love of your life. I promise.
I can't say it any better. So, I mean, with that note, I think that we've reached our time for the day.
Yes.
So, once again, feel free to look on our website, in1day.tv, which will be up here real soon. And we'll put some tips and things on there that you can look at and reference, maybe some discussion points and some good ideas, that you can utilize with your relationship. And then again, if you're seeking a relationship, like Lisa just said, focus on you. Make yourself happy, because happiness starts with you first. And then if you do that, everything else, you'll start attracting that to you, and that happiness will surround you. So
Yes. Be kind and loving to yourself. Have a beautiful day.
thanks again for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.